Thank you for tuning in with us as we talk about the history of beer. Welcome. These days, beer is one of the most highly consumed drinks in Germany. We rank 4th in the world in beer drinking. And why not? Beer is foamy, bubbly, delicious, and cold. I've heard. I'm a minor. Don't drink, kids. Stay in school. So let's talk about beer, for it has a rich story to tell. In the following video, we will not only discuss the origins of beer, but also the dominant role it played in German monasteries and, naturally, the German purity law. But first, let's clarify something that is absolutely necessary for brewing beer. We have to remember that the process of making beer requires the brewer in question to settle down, grow grains, and most importantly, brew the actual thing. This isn't some completely natural, self-explanatory process. It's not like wine where you just let grapes rot until they ferment. In other words, brewing beer requires a certain form of civilization. Otherwise, it just ain't happening. So remember, beer equals civilization. Moving on, we begin our story in Mesopotamia, 5,000 years before the birth of Christ, where the people of Sumer were the first to brew beer. It is said that the first beer ever to be brewed was an accident, as a baker left a loaf of bread out in the sun, thereby letting the yeast ferment. He noticed how the now moist and unpleasantly sour bread gave off an intoxicating feeling when eaten. We're not quite sure why someone would even try to eat an old loaf of bread, but it led to the discoverance of beer, so we'll just move on. The people of Sumer are known to have used the grains of barley and emmer, relatives of spelt, for brewing beer. They utilized about half of their crops to get the alcohol, thereby losing resources for bread and nutrition. Remember how we said that beer was a sign of civilization? Another sign of civilized people is the use of script. So it shouldn't come as too big of a surprise that there are fairly old writings about beer and its brewing process. It is through these depictions that we know which people had the resources and the know-how to brew beer. The first known script is the Monument Bleu, a description of how the drink was made out of softened bread and then sacrificed to the goddess Ninhara of fertility by the people of Sumer. Its cuneiform inscription was typical for this day and age. Another example for a description of beer brewing can be found in the Stele of Hammurabi, a king of Babylon, which was a significant city in Mesopotamia, who lived 1728 to 1686 BC. The column is 2 meters in height and has a total of 282 paragraphs carved into it. Fun fact, one of these paragraphs can be translated to, "Who dares to water down beer deserves to be drowned in their own kegs or be smothered with their own beer until they suffocate." But beer was not limited to Mesopotamia in this day and age. Historians have found up dried kegs of beer in Egypt, and the ancient Greeks have also been revealed to have had access to the brew. Aristoteles, a man known for his precise scientific endeavors, wrote the first script about beer based on scientific knowledge, in which he described, next to multiple things, the effect wine and beer had on the human body. The Romans, however, preferred wine to beer, and the brew was completely lost on them. But all the beer the Romans did not drink was consumed by their northern neighbors, their Germanic tribes. Not only did the climate in northern Europe make the production of an alcohol made of grains much preferable to one made of grapes, Germanic people were also cultured enough to make it. They just were not quite there yet with the scripture, which is why most of what we know today is derived from accounts put down by Romans. Around this time, beer wasn't a very long-lasting treat, seeing as it held up for 4 days only. To counteract on this, Germanic people cooked multiple flavorings into their beer, for example oak bark, leaves of ash trees, mushrooms, or berries. Adding these ingredients made a beer hold up longer since they killed off germs in the brew. The most effective way adding ingredient was hops though, and the Germanic tribes especially liked the bitter taste this gave to their beer. To this day, we still use hops in beer for flavor and durability, and we have the Teutons to thank for that. Moving on to the post-Christ era, the most prominent beer brewers were European monasteries. Their interest in beer was pretty big, seeing as a strongly brewed beer could be very helpful in times of Lent, seeing as fluids were allowed to be drunken in those times. Liquida non fragnum loenum, meaning that is liquid shall not break the Lent, was the general rule. The Benedictine monastery Weihenstephan in Freising, Bavaria, is the oldest monastery brewery. The monks residing here started brewing beer in the 9th century and have been serving it starting 1146. It was also not only made for self-use, but also given to pilgrims who happened to be passing through. Another rather prominent name of that time is that of Hildegard von Bingen, a nun. Not only did she confirm in her brewing that the addition of hops didn't make beer last longer, due to extreme lack of hygiene most people were presented to at that time, she suggested one should rather drink beer than water. For verily, there was a time and a place where drinking beer was the healthier and safer option to drinking H2O. The 30th century saw one of the bigger beer booms of Europe up to that time. Alone in Hamburg, there were 600 different breweries in the 16th century, and North German beer was exported to places all around Europe and Asia, including but not limited to Iceland, Jerusalem, and East India. This beer in particular had to be very strong as to not go bad before reaching its destination, and the best-known brewery for making this type of beer is that in Einbeck, in southern Lower Saxony. The Bavarians' interest in the strong beer quickly grew, and they started brewing it themselves. Up to this day, Bock beer is a well-known Bavarian beer type. The outbreak of the 30 Years' War in the 17th century thwarted the beer boom in Europe dramatically. But now, we turn to the most important date regarding beer. On April 23rd, 1516 in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, landed gentry and knights decided on the Reinheitsgebot, also called German Beer Purity Law, literally translatable to purity order. Their goal was to improve the quality of beer by limiting the ingredients brewers could use, so that law strictly prohibited breweries from using ingredients except water, barley, and hops. Any beer with different or more ingredients would be seen as impure and would warrant a penalty. They also set prices for beer, which depended on the age and type of the drink, and the profits the brewers could get by selling beer were limited. It was also enacted to limit the competition between bakers and beer brewers by not allowing brewers to use wheat or rye. This way, the availability of affordable bread was ensured. Many believe that this was the first law in Bavaria regulating food safety, though it was not. Comparable laws can be traced back to ancient Rome. Neither was the Reinheitsgebot left unchanged. Already in the mid-1500s, it was allowed to add such things as coriander, bay leaf, and wheat. After Germany unified, Bavaria pushed for the generalization of this rule. Through this law, a lot of local specialty beers grew extinct, like the spice beer and cherry beer of northern Germany, meaning German beer had less variety as a result, and Pilsner-style beer dominated the country. However, the Cologne Kölsch and the Alt beer from Düsseldorf managed to survive the purity law and are still known and drunken today. The bottling of beer began in 1880, where the majority of workers in the beer factories were female. The industrialization of beer also started in the 19th century, just after two breakthroughs, the steam engine by James Watt and cooling by Carl Paul Gottfried von Linde. These made production and packaging a lot easier and more efficient. The beer industry provided a lot of jobs for German women and men. 1910, one brewery in Bavaria, the Löwenbräu, roughly translatable to Lion Brew, held 1,000 workers. Hopefully, we have educated you efficiently and filled your beer knowledge to your heart's desire. And who knows, the next time you go out for a pint of beer, you might just think of the Summers or the German Priority Law. Should you be interested in the process of brewing beer, the ingredients of said drink, or should you just want to know what effects beer can call forth after consumption, we bid you to watch the videos our fellows have made considering these topics. Drink safely, know your limits, no drinking and driving. Farewell.